I'm Cassidy Quinn, and this is Mentally Together. Because whether you can see it on the surface or not, we are all just trying to keep ourselves mentally together. And no matter what our brains are experiencing, we're not alone, we're together. Sometimes it feels like this pod, this thing we're doing here, this community we're building, perhaps, is kind of like a little support group. No, we're not sitting around in a circle together, and no, I am not qualified to lead a support group, but obviously I share a lot of my feelings with you on here, and sometimes you share some of yours with me, whether that's in an email, or a comment on social media, or a DM on Instagram, and just for the record, there's no pressure for you to ever do that, but when you do, I appreciate it so much because it makes me feel a little less alone in whatever crappy feelings I'm having. So thank you for being my support group, whether you knowingly joined it or not. As of a couple months ago, I had never actually been to a support group. So most of what I knew about them came from movies, like when Captain America leads a support group in Avengers Endgame. So, while it was nice to have a little picture of it, I never actually knew what it was like or how they could be super useful. Until a couple of months ago, I was down some grief rabbit hole on the internet looking for people to relate to or who knows what. I don't even remember what was going through my mind at that moment, but somehow I came across a bereavement support group specifically for people who have experienced a similar loss to the type I have had with my mom. And so I thought, what the heck, let's try it. And I signed up. As I'm recording this, I've only gone twice, and I say gone, but it's just on Zoom, so I don't actually go anywhere, which is kind of nice because I get to just like sit on my couch and have as many tissues nearby as I want. But point is, I'm still getting into it. I've only gone 2 times. I'm just starting to see the benefits and also the terror of logging onto Zoom with people you maybe have met once or twice before on Zoom, but for the most part, you don't know any of them. And all of a sudden, you're sharing your deepest, darkest thoughts and feelings with them. But then, here's the crazy, wonderful thing. To those people, those deep, dark feelings and thoughts don't actually seem that deep and dark because these people on the other side of that Zoom, they get it because they have also felt similar things. They can't fix it for me. So in that way, they can't make it any better, but at the same time, they can make it better just by being there and making me feel a little less alone in all this crap I'm struggling through. So it has been tough, but it has also felt very nice so far. And before, I never really knew that things like this existed, that no matter what specific thing you are struggling through right now, in this moment, there's probably somewhere in the world, somewhere on Zoom or in an actual physical room, a group of people talking about it. Maybe there's even an entire company dedicated to supporting people through what you are going through on your own right now. My guest today works at a place like that. It's all about supporting people through their grief. So she has spent years talking about her own feelings and helping other people talk about their own. It's Brennan Wood. Brennan is the executive director of Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families. They provide support in a safe place where children, teens, young adults, and families who are grieving can share their experiences before and after a death. Brennan is also the secretary of the board of directors for the National Alliance for Grieving Children, and she was once a grieving child herself, but I'll let her tell you more about that. She's also the author of a new book coming out in January 2022 called A Kid's Book About Grief. And I had the honor of getting to read it ahead of time before we did this interview. And I know that technically, supposedly, I am an adult, but I learned so much from reading this book, so I am very grateful it exists. So I loved talking to Brennan about how she started talking about her grief, how we can help kids start talking about theirs, and how really there is no right way to grieve. So let's get into it with She's the executive director of Dougy Center right here in Portland. Welcome to the show, Brennan Wood. Thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
I am really excited to talk to you because my mom passed away almost 4 months ago. And like all I want to talk about is grief, which I feel like might be the opposite for many people who go through the whole grieving thing. But for me, like talking about it and knowing that I'm not the only one that feels like that has been very useful. So first of all, thank you for talking about your grief. Thank you to Dougy Center for opening it up, because I know that, you know, it's not like you found your way to Dougy Center and to talking about grief, writing a book about it because your life was just perfect and everyone you love is alive.
Right. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about that, the grief that led you there?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will say that wanting to talk about your grief or not wanting to talk about your grief, both of those are very normal reactions because grief is as unique as we are as individuals. And so your own reaction to your mother's death is your own reaction. And there are many of us who really want to talk about it. And there are people who don't want to talk about it. And I think that just honoring where you're at in your own journey is really, really important. So thank you for sharing about your own experience. So I started learning about grief at a very young age, unfortunately. And actually, you know, I say in my new book that my mom's death is really what started that process. And it is, although I did have both my grandfathers had died early in my life, but I was very, very young when they died. And so, you know, I don't really remember that all that well. So for me, my kind of entry into this world, this club that nobody necessarily wants to be a part of, is when my mom died 3 days after my 12th birthday. So she was diagnosed with cancer when I was 10. And died, she was 36, and it was 3 days after my 12th birthday. And I have an older brother and an older sister. And my dad was 38, and he had 3 kids, and he and my mom had been together since they were in high school, and he just didn't know how to do that. You know, my parents didn't know how to navigate my mother's death. Or illness, I guess I should say, you know, and then my dad just really did not know how to navigate my mother's death. And so it was a really, really tough time. And there wasn't a lot happening in my world that was supporting me in the way that I needed to be supported. And luckily, my dad had heard about the Dougy Center and mentioned it to me and said, you know, I heard about this place called the Dougy Center. I don't know what they do, but I know they help kids who are grieving. Do you want to go? And I jumped at the opportunity because I really needed more support than what I was getting in the outside world. So I walked through the doors of the Dougy Center for the first time, just a short time later. I was probably still 12, I would say, probably, you know, maybe a little closer to 13 than 12 at that point, but it hadn't been a year yet, I don't believe. And the Dougy Center just very quickly turned into my lifeline. And, you know, I say this often, but really it changed my life. It saved my life. I might still be alive, but it would look entirely different if I hadn't had the opportunity to come together with other kids to share the experience of having a parent die. I didn't know anyone in my outside world who'd had that experience before. And so to be in a room with other kids who were all going through what I was going through was just incredibly powerful. So I went through the program for probably about a year and a half. It's an ongoing program. Kids can stay in our peer support groups for as long as they need to, because as I'm sure you are recognizing, grief is not a 6-week process, right?
Dang it.
I know. Trust me, if I could check off those boxes and be done with it, wouldn't that be great? But it's not that. And so our groups, you know, are ongoing. Kids can stay in the program as long as they need to be here. And for me, that was, you know, probably about a year and a half, maybe almost 2 years. And then I started volunteering for Dougy Center and speaking for Dougy Center. And then I was 19 when I left Portland for almost a decade. And went lots of different places, but always knew I wanted to be at the Dougy Center. And anyone who knew me from any of the time in my life says, yeah, she wanted to work at Dougy Center. So I moved back to Portland 17 years ago, and I moved back to work at the Dougy Center. They didn't know it yet, but about 2 weeks after I got back to Portland, the receptionist position opened up. And I started off as the receptionist 17 years ago, and pretty quickly worked my way through a couple different titles. And ultimately, I think I've had about 8 different titles here at Dougy Center, and have been executive director for the last 6 years. So I'm passionate about what we do. I believe we are changing lives every day. Loss and grief, it's really something that we need to pay attention to as a society. And so I'm very grateful to be able to do the work that I do.
Yeah. Do you think it is something we pay attention to a lot in society, or have you seen it change over the years that you've been in touch with it, I guess?
Yeah, I would definitely say that I've seen it change. I think the biggest impact right now on kind of the national dialogue around loss and grief has really been the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's some great things about that the world is, I think, paying more attention to loss and grief in this moment than we ever have. And I think that that's amazing. I also think that it's a critical time for us to really make sure that we are talking about loss and grief in a way that is honoring of lived experience, as well as not pathologizing loss and grief. I think that one of the things that's really important that we talk about is that grief is a natural, normal, and healthy response to loss of any kind. And, there isn't anything wrong with you when you are experiencing loss and grief. It's part of being human. And I think that there is somewhat of a push in the world to medicalize grief. And so I think that we are paying more attention to grief as a society. And I think it's really critical that instead of pathologizing that we really normalize loss and grief for kids and families.
Yeah. And I think what you keep saying is so important, that it is different for everybody, because I know, like you said, I've lost grandparents and I've lost pets, but never, anyone that I really lived, no one is my mom. Right. And so for me, this is the first, whoa, we're really doing this grief thing experience for me. And so in the first, and I'm still fairly early, it's only been a few months, but in the first weeks, especially, it was like, oh, I think I'm doing something wrong. Why am I feeling this? Or now I'm feeling this, or today I wasn't feeling anything. Like today I didn't cry at all. There's something very wrong with me. Or today I cannot stop crying. There's something very wrong with me. And so for me, just learning so much of what you just said, that it is different for everybody, and it's not going to go away, and it might be different every single day.
Yeah. And that's so true. I mean, I think that that's something that, especially in those early months, which you are very early on. And I hate to even say that to people, because I think that when you're in that kind of early tumultuous time of loss and grief, you want to feel better, and people want to make you feel better too, which can be really challenging, right? And so I think that knowing that it is this process that isn't linear, and that there are ups and downs, and, there is this kind of perception that that it's time limited, that it looks this certain way. There's still people who are holding on to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And, what we often share, and what Elizabeth's foundation, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation, being run by her son, and Elizabeth, even in the end of her life, was really, or the last part of her work was really geared towards letting people know that those were written actually about people who were dying. So that is, those 5 stages of grief are really around someone accepting their own mortality. It isn't around grieving the death of someone close to you. And so there aren't these linear stages that you go through. There isn't something that you have to accomplish in order to move through your grief in a successful way. And I think that can be hard for people, because they want to know what are the steps? How can I get through this as quickly as possible? And And unfortunately, there's no, there's no fixing grief, right? And I think in some ways that's a tough thing, but in some ways that also, I think, frees people up to really just have their experience and to honor what they're going through when they're going through it, and on those days where you're having a better day, to just be in a place where you can embrace that and say, okay, I think one thing that is so important to me that kids know is that they can still play and laugh, and that if they're having fun, that doesn't mean that they love their person any less,
Yeah.
And kids really can dip in and out of grief. And I think that's a great lesson for all of us, right? To be able to say, how can I be in the moment and truly honor where I'm at in that moment?
Yeah, you just touched on something I've been thinking a lot as I, read your book that's coming out soon and just do more research preparing to talk to you about kids and grieving. Is like everything I read about, it's important that kids know this. It's like, well, yeah, same with the adults.
Absolutely.
But when you if you make it sound simple enough for kids to digest and probably for like the kids to talk to an adult about, then you're like, oh, hey, we adults maybe can learn that too, that like I can have, like the first day that I had, my dad got a puppy, like a month and a half ago. And it was like a month and a half after my mom had died. And it was like the most wonderful day because it's literally a bundle of joy. But then at the end of the day, it was like, how did we just have so much fun with this puppy? Like, is that okay? Like mom doesn't get to have this puppy. She loves puppies. Like,
yes.
And then, it has to be okay. Like I have to be able to feel joy or else what's the point of anything? So
Yeah. I have often thought and, articulate this in different ways, but I certainly talk about it in the book a little bit, that like, I can feel joy and sadness at the same time, and that just has to be okay. And I think taking that a step further, I often feel like you can hold two things that are diametrically opposed at the same time, and you can honor both of those things at the same time. I think about my life, and it's never going to be okay that my mom died when I was 12 years old and she was 36. Like nothing about that is ever going to be okay. At the same time, I can honor and appreciate the gifts that have come into my life because my mother died. I have a career that I love and I'm passionate about that I wouldn't have if my mom was alive. There's so many aspects of my life and who I am as a person that were shaped by my mother's death. And how does one honor that those things can be true at the same time? And it's never going to be okay that my mom died, but I can be grateful for the gifts that I've received in my life because she died. And that is really tough. And certainly not something that I think comes easily or that we should expect people to get to. Obviously making meaning out of what you've experienced in your life can be a really helpful tool for people. But I also don't want anyone to think that, that you have to make meaning out of everything. I think people will often say to people who are grieving, well, everything happens for a reason. And I frankly, I hate that one, because I disagree with that. I don't think that everything is, there's some really bad things just happen sometimes. And I don't want to minimize or take away people's experience by saying, well, it happened for a reason. And there's a lot of sayings like that are pretty trite and trying to minimize people's distress or pain or grief. And I don't know that it's fair to put that on people,
like they're in a better place, or you had your mom for insert how many years here and you're so lucky, or Yeah.
And you can feel that way, right? Like as the person, I can say, I'm grateful I had 12 years with my mom instead of 100 with another mom, right? I can feel that way. But as someone, someone around me doesn't get to make that choice for me, doesn't get to put that on me.
Yeah. I can try to believe that my mom is in a better place now. because that makes me
Absolutely.
feel good, but I don't want anybody to tell me that.
No, nope.
You don't know my mom.
Right, right. Yeah. And, I think we hear often from kids who say, how can my parent, my sibling, my best friend, whatever it is, how can they be in a better place if I'm not there with them? How is that the better place? And I think, it's just important that when we're trying to support people who are grieving, that we don't put something on them that isn't helpful or isn't theirs to carry. I heard from a lot of very well-intentioned adults in my life when I was a kid, your mom wouldn't want you to be sad. She was such a happy person. You have to live on in her memory. You have to, you're so much like your mom. You have to and those are, really tough things to put on a kid. Right. And when I came to the Dougy Center, I heard, that sounds really hard. Do you want to tell me about it? What's your favorite memory of your mom? Halloween is coming up. I remember last year you talked about her making great Halloween costumes. What would you want her to make you this year? Things that gave me permission to feel what I was feeling and also to maintain this ongoing connection with my mom. I think that oftentimes we hear you have to forget, you have to move on. And the reality is that maintaining a relationship and a connection with your person is an okay thing. I mean, we actually just talked about this before we started, right? That like you still get to have a relationship with your mom. That is your right. And she is still your mother, and my mom is still my mom. And, I haven't seen her physically now for, 36 years, something like that, 35 years, something along those lines. But that doesn't mean that she's not my mom.
Yeah. You can't get another one.
Right.
Like there's no way, even if you tried, you cannot actually replace your mom. So
nope.
Got to keep that relationship going. Cause that's the mom you got. Yeah. So before you got to Dougy Center, when you said it was within the first year, so you're still 12. Mm-hmm. Do you remember talking about your grief at all? Like what was it that you were feeling and experiencing?
Yeah, I remember there's it's a lot of it is a blur. You're 12 years old and your whole world is turned upside down. We didn't talk about my mom being sick at all. And that is something that is really tough. It was tough back then. It's still tough. I never had a conversation with my mom about her illness or her impending death. And so when she died, even though she had been sick, it was a complete shock to me. I mean, a complete shock to me. And so I was really reeling. I'm certain that my older brother and older sister had a much clearer understanding of what was happening, but they were still really young too. I mean, when my mom died, they were 17 and 15. But I definitely, it was a huge shock to me. And then, my dad really couldn't be there for us in the way that we needed him to be. And I remember some hurtful comments from friends. I remember one friend saying to me in particular, just because your mom died doesn't mean the whole world has to stop. And me being like, but my world has stopped, and just because everyone's world is seemingly keeping going, this isn't working for me, So I remember having that conversation with my dad. I was in the kitchen and I remember saying to him, like, this isn't okay. This isn't working. And he kept saying, you're fine. You're going to be fine. It's going to be fine. And I think he was trying to convince both of us,
Yeah.
And I remember I looked at him and I said, what if I'm not? Dad, what are you going to do? And he said, I heard about this place called the Dougy Center. And that's how I first heard about the Dougy Center. And, one of the things that he did tell me later on was that, the Dougy Center really helped him too. I mean, we provide support to kids and families who are grieving, and the adult who brings them is also invited to participate in an adult support group. And so he really got support as well. And then we have young adult groups for people 18 to 25-ish, and then 25-ish to 40-ish. And those groups are talking groups. And so, I think... So did I experience my grief? Yes, before I came to Dougy Center, but I didn't have the tools that I needed. I didn't have the words that I needed. I knew that I needed to express what I was going through, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And ultimately for me, being in this peer support group where I'm with 15 or 16 other kids who've all had a parent or someone in their immediate family die, and then the adult Dougy Center staff person, and then the adult volunteers, really, these adults who are more my father's peer than mine, right? Or the same age as my mom's friends. And, them giving that safe space for me, and me really learning that this was a natural, normal, healthy process, that there wasn't anything wrong with me, that I was really very normal for what I had gone through was so helpful. And I think that one of the things that I really learned is that, it isn't always the healthiest thing to try to keep things that are hard completely separate, to move away from them, to forget them, that doesn't always work so well. And I needed to really experience what I was going through, talk about what I was going through, and for some kids, talking isn't the right expression, but that's why at Dougy Center, you don't ever have to talk if you don't want to, but there's, all these different ways that kids can express themselves through art, through dress up and theater, through play, through, big energy, like just getting all of that out in a way that is, healthy and supportive of kids is so important.
That's wonderful. Yeah. All those things. And again, I'm an adult, like I'm in my 30s and my mom just died and I'm like doing art and going on runs and, cuddling with my dog, whatever.
Yes.
It's all
like absolutely.
Ways to get it out.
Yeah.
What are some of those ways that did help you like get it out and experience your grief, whether it was, when you were 12, 13, 15, or still today?
Yeah. Well, I'm a talker. I mean, that's, I'm a talker.
Me too.
As all the people in my world will attest to, I'm a talker. And so, that for me is really helpful. I think that one of the things that's been most helpful for me in this journey is sharing my own experience and hopefully in some way impacting or helping others. That has been a really big part of my navigating my own grief journey. And, and obviously that is through my career. It's also in my personal life. My husband and I adopted a third kiddo in our family after the death of both of her parents. So she's been with us full time for the last 5 years. And, that knowing that I can be there for someone else who's going through what I went through, different, of course. It just, all of that really helps me. I definitely think that has smoothed out some of the rough edges. I think it's almost like magic. It's traveled back in time and smoothed out rough edges that I didn't even know were there. Wow. So, I think all of those things are really, really important. I definitely think that for kids, like really honoring that grief looks different for each kid, but giving outlets for expression can be really, really helpful. The other thing that I would say that is very important is listening and following other people's leads. I think oftentimes in society, we want to fix it, right? We want to help people and take away their pain. And it's much more uncomfortable for us to just sit with it. And it's, there's actually a really beautiful quote out there about the friends who mean the most or who can help the most are the friends who don't try to fix it or cure it, but just are able to sit with it and acknowledge how tough it is. Those are the people that we gravitate to when we're going through hard things, So for me, I think that's been the most helpful, and acknowledging that it stinks, I think that helps, just not trying to bright sider it. I definitely have a propensity to try to bright side things. And I think that sometimes just acknowledging what stinks when it stinks,
Which is hard because what you just said, like, the most useful friends, and I've definitely felt this these past few months, are the ones that are just like, this sucks. I'll sit with it with you, however you want. If you want to cry, talk, watch reality TV, whatever, color in coloring books. Did that with a friend the other day. And not try to say like, it's okay, you're going to be fine, it's going to get better, this will pass. But I also know that sometimes, like in my head, I wish people could make it better. Like sometimes I'll be, I have a wonderful boyfriend who I live with, who always is supportive if I need to go cry to him. But sometimes I'm like, what's he going to say to make it better? I hope he can make it better. Yeah. And then we get into it and you're like, the point is not for you to make it better. Like nobody can make it better.
Right.
So just tell me that it sucks and we'll just agree.
Yeah.
But it's like both sides want to be able to, for that person to be able to make it better.
Absolutely. Totally and completely. And I think, one of the things that I see as kind of I've taken this on as like my job a little bit is, I use this analogy sometimes where it's like, when my mom first died, I felt like I was dropped into the middle of an ocean in a storm that was unrelenting, and the second you put your head above water, you're gasping for air and you're getting pummeled again. It feels like this relentless storm. And over time, right, that storm starts to lessen a little bit and you're still in the ocean and you're still you're still swimming and trying to get those breaths, right? And then over time, it's like, and by time, I mean a long time, the storm lessens, you learn to swim with the current, you start to know when like things are coming up that are going to pummel you back into that ocean, right? And you can prepare for those a little bit. You start to just like notice that things are lighter and there's more room for laughter and good stuff. And, and that just happens over time. And I feel like, 30, I don't know, I should probably figure out how many years ago it actually was. 34
who needs to count?
Years ago, 34 years ago. 34 years later, I am walking on the beach 99% of the time, now I can know in an instant what it feels like to be back in that ocean. And I often think that like that grief pool is always there and it's much easier to access it, I think, than if I had never had that experience. But, I'm walking on the sand, on the beach, and every once in a while, definitely something comes that just knocks me back into the water. But for the most part, I'm okay. And so I feel like now that I'm on the sand or, for the last however many years it's been, that I can be one of those people that's like holding up a lantern, and saying like, there is a beach and, and someday you will find that beach. Right. Oh, and I think that collectively, if enough of us can just hold up our lantern, right, and just say, I'm here, this sucks, but there is a beach out here and the storm will pass in some way, without trying to minimize it or without trying to say, you better hurry up and get here.
Yeah. Base is running out on the beach. Come on, come quick.
Yeah. That's my weird little analogy.
No, I like it. Well, because I've just been realizing over the last couple of weeks, like, okay, I think there are more days. I didn't have that metaphor, but like, I think there are more days when I'm on the beach and then maybe the next day some giant, huge tsunami came over onto the beach and ripped me back into the ocean. And then the next day I might be back on the beach, but there are becoming to be more days where the sun is like peeking out on the beach. It still might be a cloudy day on the beach some days, but yeah.
No,
I like that metaphor.
Yeah. Well, you can take it. It's yours now. You can take it. But yeah, I mean, and I also feel like, there's an idea that like everything, and I don't know if I'm sure this might be a global thing or an American thing. I don't know, but it definitely feels like there's this idea that like everything is supposed to be bright and shiny all the time, and the reality of life is that it's not. And so how can we learn to sit with that and acknowledge that, and that that becomes okay. And, there's a couple different things that I think of. I know, like in Japan, when pottery breaks, there's this old tradition of fixing it with gold, so it makes it more beautiful. There's a Leonard Cohen quote that I think is amazing, which is, that essentially it's the cracked places that let the light in,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that that's really true. And sorry, I'm going to quote someone that I really respect, Dr. Donna Sherman. And she says that, with the right support, these experiences can teach us a deeper appreciation for the beauty and the brevity of life, right? And so how do we hold the space for that while also not having expectations of people who are grieving, especially in that, early time of grief, to put that on them,
Yeah. Have you been putting off a visit to the doctor of any kind for way too long? I'm talking a flu shot, an x-ray, or even therapy. I know how that feels. You know you need to do it, but sometimes it just seems so difficult. That's why I've started going to Zoom Care. With locations in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Colorado, Zoom Care offers same-day doctor visits that you can book online or from their app. Yep, you don't have to talk to anyone on the phone. They even offer mental health visits, where you can speak to a board-certified mental health provider in person or through video. That's how I've been going to therapy this year, all on my webcam from the comfort of my own couch. Oh, that reminds me, I better go book my next session. If you're ready to make an appointment of your own, head to zoomcare.com. That's ZOOMCARE.com.
Now, back to the show.
One thing that I've definitely learned through my own grieving that I clearly is true for everybody, but I didn't even know it was a thing, that like grief actually changes your brain, the capacity for things. Like, I keep referring to it as grief brain. I'm like, oh, that's my grief brain. Sorry, I totally forgot that thing, or couldn't sleep that day, or my brain just dropped out halfway through a sentence and forgot anything I was talking about, or forgot everything about my mom. Can't remember anything today. And obviously, I just said true for everybody, but obviously in totally different ways. Was that true for you? And what did that mean? And what have you learned about that part of grief?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know that was true for me. It was a long, long time ago, so it's hard for me to look back and pinpoint exactly what the effects were. What we know to be true is that grief is a big experience, right? That it encompasses a lot of things. It is not just emotion. It is not just sadness. And I think a lot of people think that grief is just being sad, and there's so much more to it than that. It is physiological, it's spiritual, it's, all the things that it can be. It is life-changing. It can be all of those things, and it's very unique to each individual. Grief brain is definitely a thing, and we hear about that all the time at Dougy Center. We've served over 55,000 kids, teens, young adults, and adult family members, and so we hear a lot about the impact of that and the length of time that it really takes to get through that. And so, certainly being very gentle and kind to yourself during that time. And also, I think as a society, learning that it isn't a matter of 3 bereavement days and then everything's going to just be fine afterwards. I had someone tell me once, well, that's what the funeral is for. It marks the end of that intense grief time. And then you can move on and find closure. And to this person, I
How
said,
many years should I wait to have the funeral?
Right, exactly. And to this person, I said, when if your daughters ever die, you call me and tell me that everything's good now that you've had the funeral. Not to be a jerk, but honestly, it's not that simple, unfortunately. Fortunately or unfortunately, I guess it just is what it is.
Yeah, I know, because you even said at the beginning, it would be nice if it was just you go through 6 weeks and it's done. And I thought, yes, but also the more I feel it, I'm like, I kind of want this. I don't want to just be sad forever, obviously, but it's my mom. I want part of it, this, the missing her and hating it so much does make me feel connected to her. And so I don't really want to just be like, okay, it's been 4 months. Now I'm good. Bye, mom. Never going to think about you again. Cool. We're good. It's now okay. Like you said, it's never going to be okay that your mom is gone. And
yeah, no, absolutely. Because I mean, if you think about it, like I will often say, like, you grieve as deeply as you feel, you grieve as deeply as you love, you grieve as deeply as you are. Right. And these relationships that we've had with people are, you were in relationship with your mom for 30, however many years, right? And you're still in relationship with your mom, but like, why would you just be over that in 4 months? Like, you're not going to be, and that's okay. And certainly if there are things that folks are going through when they're grieving that are impacting their ability to be present in their lives, like, you need to address those things, right? So if you're, a year out from the person's death and it's impacting your ability to get out of bed and get up in the morning, like, that's something you need to address and figure out, of course. But for most people, like, this reaction of loss and grief is just a natural, normal, healthy reaction, and I think we talk as a society a lot about being trauma informed. And I think that that's so important. And we also need to really talk about being grief informed. And trauma isn't always grief, and grief isn't always trauma. And Dougy Center actually has a very wonderful and robust paper on becoming grief informed that we're working on, maybe a little more of a condensed version, the Cliff Note version for folks, and hoping to get that out in probably January or February, because we think it's such an important thing to know truly how to support people who are grieving.
Yeah. Well, because, if we're saying that however many years later, decades later, you can still be grieving the loss of a mom, like, pretty much everybody is grieving then, right? Like,
at some point.
And then you just are forever. Like, so we then should probably be informed if we're all just going to keep going in our own ways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And I don't think the answer is to try to just tell people to get over it. I don't think that works super well.
Yeah. We talk a lot about on this podcast about self-care. Ask people like, oh, what do you do if you're having a bad day? What helps you? Meditating, journaling, whatever. Are those kinds of things that are helpful in a grieving process? Or is it like, oh yeah, writing in your journal is not going to fix your sadness about your mom? And again, none of it's to fix it, right? It's to feel
process it, work through it. Yeah. Well, here's what I would say. I think that self-care is very important. I think self-care is often very different in practice than people think it is in theory, right? In people's mind, I think people think of self-care as bubble baths and, and a cup of tea. And oftentimes self-care can look very, very different than that. And I do think self-care is important. I would say that certainly in families where there are children who are grieving, the adults taking good care of themselves is something that can really be impactful in a positive way for the kids in the family who are grieving. I don't think that means not showing your emotion or not talking about your grief or not experiencing that, but certainly getting the support that you need to navigate that can be incredibly helpful. What I will also say is that I think, self-care, again, looks different for different people. And whatever is helpful for you to process what you're going through is the thing that I would advocate for you doing. I think there also is, I have a recognition that self-care can also be something that is a privilege, right? And not everybody is afforded that opportunity. For kids and families who come to Dougy Center, 36% of our families are living at or below the federal poverty level. Many people who are grieving, especially in this country right now, in terms of COVID, it's disproportionately impacting communities of color. I feel like it's very important that we talk about self-care. And I also think it's really important that we acknowledge that there are times that self-care can really be a privilege. When you have a mom who is parenting bereaved kids whose partner has died and they were bringing in, half the income. And now that parent is, having to pick up double shifts or, like, what does that mean? And so I think that to me, getting support for your family, for the loss and grief that you are experiencing can be, I guess that can be a critical component of self-care, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah. And I always think self-care can be as simple as, making sure you get enough water or sleep or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
On time for the bubble bath.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yes, so I'm a huge proponent and advocate of self-care, and also just have a deep recognition that looks different for different people. Yeah. Sometimes true self-care doesn't look like taking a break. It means, doing some things that you need to do in order to get to a place where, whatever that is for yourself. Mm-hmm. And then also that, it can be a real privilege to have the space to do those things. And so, honoring that sometimes saying you need to take care of yourself doesn't always look the same for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely important. What if I don't have any kids? Some people listening might be parents of kids, obviously, or just adults who have relationships with kids. I have nieces and nephews that I know, although they had a very different relationship with my mom than I did.
Yeah.
They are sad too. And sometimes I think, like, how do I check in on them? What do I say? I don't want to, make them more sad. It's the same with adults also. But I think when it comes to kids, sometimes there's even an extra level of like, how do I know if they're doing okay? How do I ask them? How do we open it up? What advice would you have for any adults trying to connect with kids in their grieving process?
Yeah. So I think that the advice that I would give would be to speak openly and honestly about death and loss and grief, and to open up that conversation. Kids aren't always going to want to talk about it, and that's okay. But if they know that you're an adult that's willing to go there with them, that can go a long way, even if they never take advantage of it, right? Just knowing that you are someone in their life that if they want to talk about hard things to, they can talk about them. And honesty is really important. And, in circumstances where there are extenuating factors, that's the thing, right? It's not always clean and easy, right? There's lots of extenuating factors that are happening for families. And so when you're honest with kids about the circumstances, about what's happened, about how somebody dies, and you answer their questions honestly, you are building trust for them with you, but also with other adults, right? Mm. They're learning that adults will tell them the truth and speak to them. So I would say, open up the conversation with honesty and, being willing to talk about it. And letting kids know that you are someone that they can talk to about it. And they may or may not want to talk about it, because kids grieve uniquely as well. And they might want to express their grief in a very different way. But just knowing that they have a caring adult who's interested in their expression of grief goes a long way. And then I would say, listen, when they do open up and talk about it, listen, and don't try to fix it or take it away, right? Just listen and validate what they're experiencing and what they're going through. I think, we want to be open to those different styles of grieving. We want to be open to acknowledging that it looks different for different kids. I think for little kids, it can be really helpful to have structure. And I probably, actually, this is probably true for all of us. This is one of those things that I say for kids, but for all of us, that they're having structure and consistency and routine can be very helpful. But within that, you also really want to offer choices and have flexibility, so that kids feel like they have some control over what is happening to them in a time when it feels like they have very little control. And, I would say reach out for support for the kids in your life when they need it. There are lots of programs across the country and around the world that do similar work to Dougy Center. We were the first of our kind, but we train thousands of people a year on the Dougy Center model, and reach out for support. access the resources on our website. We have hundreds of free resources on our website, and talk with kids openly and honestly. I think, we have served, as I said, lots and lots of families. And there has never been a time where I've ever heard of a kid saying, I'm glad I was lied to.
Ooh.
We hear all the time, I wish that they had trusted me to tell the truth. I wish that I knew something was going on, but nobody told me what was happening, or nobody told me, how they died, but I know how they died. Like all of those things, right? And oftentimes kids' imagination is worse than the reality.
Yeah.
Right. So if we just are open and honest with kids, we had a kid in our program once, this was decades ago, but who came into the program after his dad had died of suicide. And he, we work really hard with kids or with families to make sure that the kids know the truth around the details of the person's death. And maybe not detail, but know the overarching kind of story of what happened. But this kid came in and the mother had told him it was a car accident. And he was 9 years old. And in opening circle, we always give kids the opportunity to share their story. And this kid said, my dad died and he killed himself, but don't tell my mom. She thinks it was a car accident. And
oh my gosh,
what that shows me is that kids know a lot more than we give them credit for, right?
Yeah.
And so speaking with kids openly and honestly, having those discussions, it's one of the reasons that I partnered with the company, a kids company about, but they write this series of books called A Kid's Book About, because, they believe that kids are ready for these conversations. They believe that kids are ready. And what we know from our work at Dougy Center is that our kids are ready. I mean, they've been through tough stuff and they're ready to have the conversations about it. And so, that's all my advice, I guess.
And not talking about something doesn't mean it's not happening.
Right. Yeah. And that's another thing, right? It's like we say, oh, well, we don't want to make them think about it. Well, we hear from kids all the time is I'm thinking about it all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I fully respect and understand that like some kids are not going to want to talk about it at school. Right. Mm-hmm. But to have that teacher who has said to them, hey, listen, I know, I've heard what you're going through. Like maybe share like, hey, my mom died when I was a kid. I've heard what you're going through. It stinks. It's the pits. You're welcome to come and, talk to me anytime you want, or if you need extra space, you can always come into my classroom or, whatever that looks like, whatever that, looks like for those adults. But to give kids that space where they know that they have room to be where they're at.
Yeah.
In terms of grief.
Yeah. And again, same with adults. It's like,
yes,
I might not want to talk about it. Some days I might want to, but if you open up the space, so I at least know I can talk to you if I feel like it.
Yeah.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
And it's like, I used to think what I hear a lot of people also think is like, oh, if my friend, somebody loses somebody, I don't want to ask them about it because it's going to remind them that their mom died, dad died, brother died, sister died, grandma died, whatever.
Right.
Like, no, right. Like you just said, it might be on their mind all the time. You're not going to remind them.
Yeah.
The person's still dead.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And also like sharing stories about the person who died is so huge,
Yes.
Like I wish everyone who ever knew my mom and my dad, because my dad died when I was 36. So, and my dad, I wish that, if they think of my dad or my mom or, have a story, I wish that they'd text it to me or call me and say, I thought of your mom today because we did this thing together when we were kids or whatever it is. Like, those are gifts. Those are gifts for us. And so, sharing your memories and how they impacted you, with the person who's the closer person.
Yes. A few of my mom's friends have been doing that and it is wonderful. And I started a Google Doc and I put them all in there whenever they send me a memory because I want to have all of them. I want as many memories as I can have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. And there's this and I read it in an article, I think in the New York Times, if I'm remembering correctly, but that talked about kind of like it was almost an image of a bullseye, right? And there's like this circle in the center, and then there's these circles. And the idea was that you don't go inward for support, right? So like the core group of people are your dad, the people that are like right in the middle of it and are in that intense experience of having someone in their immediate family having died, someone that's very, very close to them. And then there's that second ring of, right, your mom's best friends and like, the people who love you all and love your mom, but aren't in that like closest relationship, right? And it kind of goes out. And the idea is that you never go in for support. You go out for support, right? And so like, someone who worked with your mom isn't going to call you for support of their grief, right? They're going to be in that same circle, right? Or a step out. And the people who are in the center circle are the ones who can go to anybody, right? For support. And I love that. I love that idea because it's like the people on the outer circle should be supporting in, right? And then going to the same level or out for their support.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's a really good visual for something that I have definitely thought about, but hadn't put it in those words. And like you said, if you're on the same level of the circle too, because like some of my mom's friends have been getting closer with her sisters because they're like on, and I don't know, maybe the sister that maybe they're not on the exact same levels, but they're like connecting instead of reaching out to me and my brother and my dad. Cause it's like
so much.
Yeah. We're not right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really good visual. You mentioned your book, and obviously we've referred to it a couple of times, but A Kid's Book About Grief, written by you, is coming out. It's available for pre-order right now. When can people actually get it?
Yeah, so it is available for pre-order and it is being printed in January. So if you pre-order it, it will ship in January. Yes. And this company does such a beautiful job of sharing stories with kids at roughly 5 or 6 to 10 years old is what it's geared towards. And they have lots of incredible books about lots of subjects, kids' book about racism, a kid's book about anxiety, a kid's book about body image. There's lots of really great books. And so, we've been talking for a couple of years now about a kid's book about grief and how important that book would be to have in their collection. And so this seemed like the right time to put it out into the world. And it's a kid's book, but they aren't illustrated. They're designed and they're a little longer than your usual kid's book. And they're definitely best read with an adult. So
yes, you can learn together, have some conversations, right?
Yes. The idea of opening up those conversations. And what I hope is that the book will help kids and parents and, adult caregivers start those conversations about grief and memories, and that it will help set a tone for a lifetime of sharing and talking openly and honestly about loss and grief and those, memories and stories and all the stuff we want to hold on to,
Yeah. Well, and thank you to you guys for letting me read a copy of it ahead of time because I love it so much. And it helped me as an adult without reading it with a kid. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that feeling's okay. Oh, that too. And I love that it does come from you. Like it comes from your story and your perspective. And you say in there, like, my mom died when I was 12. It sucks. It's never going to be okay. Yep. What was it like? Has it been therapeutic or hard or all of the feelings above and in between for you to put it into writing and let it soon out into the world?
It's interesting. It has been an interesting process. I mean, it's definitely, you're always vulnerable when you're putting yourself out there in that way. I tend to share my story a lot. And so that hasn't been too challenging for me. I think that the process itself has been unique and it's exciting. And what I hope is that it helps kids that, maybe this is the first time their family's talking about it, I attended this workshop, and I was there professionally, and of course have done a lot of work around my story and my mom's death and my dad's death. And I was in this room with many people who had never talked about their experience, women in their 70s who had never, ever talked about their mom's death when they were little.
Wow. And
that hurts my heart, to not have that opportunity to talk about your experience, to be able to share memories about your person. And so I just hope that the collective we can make that happen sooner for people. And I hope this is one way that that happens.
Yeah. Thank you for doing the important work and using your story as a conduit for it, because clearly a lot of people can relate.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you've made it this far into this episode of Mentally Together, there's a chance you're enjoying it, maybe? So if you want to know more about what goes on behind the scenes of this show, come hang out on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll get the video version of each episode early, get to be the first to ask questions of each podcast guest, and get to see deleted video clips from each episode. Oh, and you'll hear things you won't hear anywhere else. Like from this episode. Clearly, Brennan is a pro when it comes to talking about her own grief and knowing how to talk to other people to help them through theirs. So, towards the end of this episode, she asked me a wonderful question: what is my favorite memory of my mom? And obviously, I gave her a really long answer and talked forever because I love my mom very, very much and I miss her very, very much. And then I had to ask her back, what is her favorite memory with her mom? So those answers, those wonderful memories, are over on Patreon. You can sign up and support our show at patreon.com/Cassidy Quinn. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Cassidy Quinn. Now back to the show. Now I have a few questions from our friends on the internet for you.
Great.
So Shelly wants to know, does grief differ based on the circumstances of a loved one's death?
Well, what I would say, thank you, Shelly, for your question. And what I would say is that there are many things that impact your grief experience, right? Your relationship with the person who died. One of the things that was really important to me in the book was to really share that, you can feel things that you might not expect to feel when someone dies. You can feel relief. You could feel, there are circumstances under which people have had really tumultuous relationships with someone. And so there can be all sorts of emotions that aren't just sadness when someone dies, and that all of those are okay. And so what I would say to Shelly is that, yes, I think that the manner in which someone dies can absolutely impact your grief, just like the relationship that you have with them can impact your grief. Mm-hmm. And what I would say is that recognizing that grief isn't always just one thing, that it's this experience of so many different emotions and feelings and thoughts and reactions, it is okay. And there are types of death in our society that are more stigmatized than others. And families who experience those deaths definitely have reactions in their grief that are very perhaps impacted by that experience. I would say that we have a group at Dougy Center for kids who've experienced a murder or a violent death in their family. And oftentimes those families will stay in our program for much, much longer because of the court system. Mm. And that absolutely is impacting their grief, right?
Yeah.
Those things are absolutely impacting their grief. The way that people respond, families who've had someone die of suicide or an overdose death, or a substance related death, in some way, that can absolutely impact your grief and the way you experience it, but also the support that you get from the people around you, right? If there's judgment around how the person died, and that judgment is also being shared with the family, that can impact things. So yes, I think it all impacts it. And navigating that can be another layer to an already really difficult time.
Yeah. There could just be extra layers of all kinds.
Absolutely. And I think, that can be true under the most, what might seem like the most kind of ordinary circumstances. I would definitely say that there are times when, like a kid might have had a very traumatic death in their family that they didn't witness or weren't a part of, or didn't, and it might not impact them from a trauma perspective in the same way that a kid's seeing every experience of someone going through cancer, right? Like some of that can be really traumatic for kids. So you can't assume just based on how somebody died, anything around what that experience was like for people. So, what we want to do is ask and honor the lived experience of people.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Kelsey says, I want to help others with grief. Can I volunteer? I lost my dad 3 years ago and want to help.
That's wonderful. That's amazing. And yes, we always need dedicated volunteers at Dougy Center. So the groups are run by a Dougy Center staff person who has at least a master's level education in a social service field. But the majority of the adults who work directly with the kids and families are trained volunteers. So we typically have somewhere between 200 to 250 volunteers in any given year that work directly with the kids and families. And we train those folks on how to really be present with kids in their experience. And so, yes, get on our website and take a look at the volunteer information, or give us a call and we can get you signed up.
Excellent. Tori says, how do you handle grieving while also trying to support others who are grieving? Which we've definitely talked about to some extent. And something I keep just thinking more about, like I said, as I realize we all just keep grieving. So, it's not like, oh, I'm going to be done. So now next year I can help my friend whose mom dies.
Right.
I still, and right now while I'm in the early stages, I'm kind of like, I have a hard time helping anybody because I just need to get my own head above water. But what advice would you have there?
Yeah, it can be really, really tough. And I think that that's one of the reasons why a program, for families like Dougy Center can be so helpful, because it's a space where, it's a safe space where kids can come and express what they're going through, while the adult who brings them can come and get support for their own experience, which can be really helpful. Because, we definitely hear from kids, like, it's hard because I don't want to make my mom sad, right? So I try not to show my grief because I don't want to upset my mom. Those kinds of things. That's real. That happens, not just with kids, right? That happens at any age. And so that is real. And, I again, when we're talking about self-care, right? The old, put your own oxygen mask on first can be a little trite, but I also do think it's true, right? So you do need to take care of yourself. And I think that kids look to that modeling as well and see when someone is attending to their own mental health and well-being, that can really be a good thing and be helpful for kids. What I would also say is to give yourself lots of grace, when you're grieving and you're trying to support others who are grieving, especially if it's the same person. That can just be really tough and really hard. For kids, oftentimes what we'll recommend is, for as an example, so funeral services, right, or memorial services can be really hard. And if you're there and you're grieving and you're also trying to attend to the needs of kids, that can be really tough. So what we often recommend is getting help, right? Getting support in that. So, maybe if I'm going to, my mom's funeral and I'm an adult and I have kids that are grieving their grandmother, right? Maybe I'm going to ask my best friend or someone who, the kids know really well and really love to come in and be a support person for the kids. And that, instead of supporting me, can you focus on the kids? And if they need to be taken out in the middle of the memorial service for any reason, can you do that? And, someone, and then let the kids know, this is your person. And this person is here to help you if anything comes up, those kinds of things, getting some supports in place for yourself and others that are maybe that next tier out of folks, right? Who have interest in helping and who, are in the mix, but maybe not as impacted as you are. I think that can be really helpful. It's tough stuff, and I think that navigating it the best you can, offering yourself a lot of grace, offering the people around you a lot of grace, and, giving words to it when you can. And it's tough. It's tough stuff. It's not easy.
I think even just you acknowledging that like, it's not supposed to be easy. We're not supposed to really, like, we can keep learning about it and how to help people better and help ourselves, but it's never going to be easy. It's just sucks, but we have to do it. So, but if somebody says something that you think is stupid, like, oh, your mom's in a better place, like, they're probably just trying to make it better. Yeah. And everybody's just like usually trying to do their best, but it's just a hard, crappy thing.
It is. It really is. And there's lots of, we have lots of different national partners who do amazing work around, I'm thinking of, there's a group called Where's Your Grief that does a lot of wonderful Instagram content around.
Oh yeah. I think they popped up in, my phone is sending me all the grief content these days.
Modern Loss is another great one. There's lots, and I'm thinking for kind of that more young adults, time of life, where there's lots of like responses that people have and share around those kinds of things. We have some resources around like what not to say. And if you want to say this, maybe try this. That's a similar version of that, but not necessarily as prescriptive. I think that taking the shoulds out of sentences, and not offering to heal it all or fix it all or not think you can is, again, just going back to that. It's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Last but not least, we have a little speed round. The questions we ask everybody that comes on the podcast.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, when was the last time you cried?
Oh my gosh, I cried in a meeting this morning with somebody talking about the impact.
I don't know if I should be cheering. Maybe it was really sad for you. I'm sorry.
I didn't cry, but I definitely teared up because someone shared a firsthand experience of the impact of the Dougy Center program on someone that they were working with. And the way that they articulated it was just so beautiful. It brought tears to my eyes because, it's pretty amazing to be able to know that the work that we're doing is supporting kids and families. So yeah, I shed a few tears this morning.
Wonderful. What about the opposite? When's the last time you had a big belly laugh?
Oh gosh, definitely this weekend. Probably last night would be my guess, but I am very fortunate to be married to someone who I laugh a lot with. And so, this weekend I laughed a lot.
What is your favorite one-liner about grief?
All right. Well, that's a great question. I will definitely say that I love the people who just put stuff out that's like grief sucks, or, there's just all this like not trying to bright center it. I love that. But my favorite line is probably we grieve as deeply as we love.
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful and feels very accurate for me.
Yeah.
What are you grateful for right now?
Oh, I'm grateful for so many things. I think that is something that gratitude really helps. If you can practice gratitude, it really helps a lot. I am grateful every day for the work that Dougy Center is doing. And I know that might, I don't know, that is something that I am deeply grateful for every day. And my colleagues who are doing that work, the team at Dougy Center, I'm grateful for them all day, every day, because they are literally doing that work all day, every day, supporting people. We answered over 27,000 calls in 2020 alone for, crisis response, referrals, resources, from anything from how do I tell my kids that their dad died this morning? We get calls like that all day, every day. And so I work with this incredible team of people who are dedicated to that. And that's just amazing.
Yeah. Wow. That really is amazing. What sound can calm you down or bring you joy when you hear it?
Oh, well, music. Music is a huge thing. Definitely a huge thing. And then, the voices of my loved ones, my friends, my family, they're my people. So yeah.
What about a smell? Is there a smell that brings you joy?
The smell of when you're in Hawaii, that like smell that's like humid and florally and like, come on, I need that smell in my life a lot more.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Let's go.
Yes, let's do it.
What is the best thing you do for your mental health?
The best thing that I do for my mental health is to spend time with friends and family, laugh, unplug. When I can be fully present with my friends and family, that's the best thing that I do for my mental health.
What about the worst thing or something that you're like, I kind of want to stop doing that, but it's relatable.
Oh, I would say that, one of the challenges of being so dedicated to my job is definitely that, I place a really high priority on my job, which is great. And I think that I could unplug a little more. I think that would be a good thing. But it's hard when you know that, there's so much work to be done.
It's tough. Yeah. Right. Obviously the work for you guys literally does not end. So
yeah.
Thank you. What's your biggest guilty pleasure?
Oh, I would definitely say my biggest guilty pleasure would be like movies that are hilarious, but like have just bad movies that I love that I'll watch over and over again. Definitely my guilty pleasure for sure.
Yes. Laughing is great. What is your favorite thing about your brain?
My ability to retain information about random people and things. Like I do a pretty good job, and especially in my work, it's really helpful to remember things about people. So, I do a pretty good job of remembering people's stories and being able to say that. I don't always get it 100% right, but that's definitely something that I'm proud of, that I keep things in my brain like that. And I can go, wait a second. Last time I saw you, didn't your grandson go off to college, or, those kinds of things. I can remember those, and connecting with people is really the most valuable thing to me. And so it's a way to connect with people. So I'm grateful that my brain helps me do that most of the time.
Yeah, that's powerful for sure. What is something you're really good at that people might not know?
Well, I might not still be good anymore, but I could tap dance like nobody's business when I was a kid.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think if I could bust out some tap shoes, I could still tap dance. Not like I could, but I could tap dance.
Probably like riding a bike, come back to you.
Maybe.
Oh, I used to love tap dancing. I haven't done that in a long time either. And the last one, if you had to get something tattooed on your forehead, we're in this new stupid future world where everyone is getting a forehead tattoo that's your message to the world, but also, you're on Zoom, you're in the mirror, it's a message to yourself too. What would your forehead tattoo say?
Well, okay, so this is so cheesy.
And you have bangs, so you have to
I get
the
to cover
bangs
that.
back.
Yeah. It's probably super cheesy, but I actually have the word hope tattooed on my foot. I would probably get hope tattooed. I did some work around my values. I don't know if you've ever read any of Brene Brown's stuff, but on her Dare to Lead, all of the work around that. Did some work on my values, and my core values are really hope, and so optimism, and perseverance or resiliency. And so, I would probably get hope. Yeah.
That's beautiful. Very Brene Brown of you. And then, of course, where can everybody find you guys? Where can they come to the Dougy Center? Check out the resources online. Check out a kid's book about grief coming up.
Yeah.
Where do we go?
Yeah, connect with the Dougy Center online. So dougy.org, dougy.org, or any of our social media. Connect there.
I love that it's just dougy.org.
Dougy.org. Check out dougy.org. There are literally hundreds of free resources, downloadable tip sheets, activities, toolkits for people who are grieving, but also for those who want to support people who are grieving. Our podcast, Grief Out Loud, is an exceptional resource and has been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times all over the world. So check out our resources and connect with us. And if you're not in the Portland, Oregon area and you're listening, on our website, there is a national program finder that can help you find resources in your area as well.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me on your podcast today. Thank you for sharing with me about your mom.
Thank you so much. I obviously could talk about this forever. I'm so excited for your book to be out in the world and excited for me to know more about all the Dougy Center resources that are available for all of us. So thank you.
You're very welcome. Thanks for talking to me today.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, wonderful human, for listening to this episode of Mentally Together. We put out new episodes every Monday, so I, Cassidy Quinn, will see you next week. In the meantime, go do something nice for your brain today. Go put your phone away and spend some quality time with friends or family. Go join a support group or pre-order a kid's book about grief. It comes out in January. Whatever will make your day just a little bit better. Because remember, we are all just trying to keep ourselves mentally together. Mentally Together is produced, hosted, and edited by Cassidy Quinn in collaboration with Koba FM, a podcast network that is all about community, baby.